Today we get to talk about another sequel, and it's a sequel that has been completely decimated by its own potential fan base. We are talking about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. Now, this particular video game is a sequel to a game of the same namesake, just without the 2 in it, and that particular video game came out all the way back in 2004. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is an action role-playing video game that was developed by Troika Games. It was published by Activision for Microsoft Windows, and that particular video game was actually beloved by people that played that game. Everybody talked about the RPG elements, the gameplay elements overall, and Troika Games was known for its RPG finesse, right? That's what they made. Troika Games was known for that. But unfortunately, Troika Games ended up closing down right before the release of the first game, thus resulting in the second game being developed by somebody entirely different, which was Hardsuit Labs. And Hardsuit Labs put the game through complete development hell, only for the game to end up in the hands of the Chinese Room. Now, the Chinese Room, I actually like them as a developer. There are video games that they have worked on and released that I thoroughly enjoy, and we're going to talk about it in this video. But overall, it is time to discuss exactly what led to the demise of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, and why this is just another example of a video game getting completely destroyed, not even just by modern writers in general, but overall by a developer that, whether through their own choice or not, just wasn't able to create something that the original fans could even recognize. So hit that like button, subscribe button, all that good stuff that the YouTube algorithm likes. Let us talk about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. So if you guys are unfamiliar with the original Vampire the Masquerade, let's talk about a little bit of the history. So as mentioned previously in the video, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is a 2004 action role-playing video game that you are seeing right now on your screen, and it was developed by a company called Troika Games. It was published by Activision for Microsoft Windows, and it was set in the world of darkness. The game is based on White Wolf's role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade, and it follows a human who is killed and revived as a fledgling vampire. The game then depicts the fledgling's journey through early 21st century Los Angeles to uncover the truth behind a recently discovered relic that heralds the end of all vampires. Now, it is an action role-playing video game. It had really decent RPG elements, and the game overall was light, right? Like, the game ended up getting kind of like a cult following in a way, where people started talking about it more and more. Before you know it, it was highly sought after. Now, considering the time that this game came out, it came out during the time of Golden Age RPGs, where these games, that's how they were, right? Unfortunately, though, what ended up happening with the sequel was anything but that. So Troika Games ended up shutting down, and so the game ended up coming out, and then the sequel ended up landing in the hands of a developer that is known as Hardsuit Labs. Now, the thing is, the developers behind the first game, Troika Games, was made up of people from the original Fallout developers. Troika went on to make an RPG called Arcanum before they went on to make Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Now, we're bringing up these companies and these games to establish that Troika Games had a pedigree for good RPGs. They built their careers and skills making them, and it's important. But the developers of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 were Hardsuit Labs, which previously made a shooter called Blacklight Retribution. They were redeeming factors, the narrative. The lead behind the first game, Brian Mitsoda, had took the narrative helm again for this particular video game. However, what ended up happening to signal the first sign of development hell was the fact that Mitsoda actually got fired. Yes, he got fired from his position, which was the first sign of development hell for this particular video game. Then it got delayed. It got delayed from early 2020 into late 2020, and then eventually into 2021. So after the delay and the firing, the Hardsuit Labs company went completely silent and basically fell into development hell. Multiple issues started to affect this video game. Changes in publisher funding and all that nonsense basically spilled out to the public, and people realized that, wow, is this game even going to come out at this point? And if it does, are we even going to recognize it? Then what ended up happening? Well, it landed in the hands of the Chinese Room. Now, I want to be very clear, ladies and gentlemen, I like the Chinese Room. I don't think they're bad developers at all. I think what ended up happening is this is just not their kind of game, right? This game is meant to be an RPG action role-playing game. That's not what we got, right? Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is getting felted right now by its fans over on the Steam forums and basically everywhere for the lack of RPG elements. But now that you look at the Chinese Room and look at their previous history of video games, you can understand very quickly these are not RPG developers. developers. These are not people that actually make RPGs. So why would you give an RPG to the hands of people that never made them? It just doesn't seem right, especially one that has a previously established video game, right? So they have to follow up that video game, and they ended up doing something completely different that combined with really cringe millennial writing, by the way, it's just not what fans wanted. That's really what it is. Now, a couple of video games that they have released, the Chinese Room is Still Wakes the Deep, for example. I thoroughly enjoyed Still Wakes the Deep. I played it to completion. Fantastic video game. And I understand these games are not for everyone. These are narrative experience kind of walking simulators. So I understand that the lack of combat's probably going to turn off a lot of people. But I enjoyed Still Wakes the Deep. Dear Esther is also another video game that they worked on. And they also worked on Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs. I haven't played A Machine for Pigs. I played the previous Amnesia games. So I need to play A Machine for Pigs. But I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it if it's anything similar to Still Wakes the Deep, which some people say that it is. So I look forward to playing that. I do have it in my library, in my backlog. But overall, again, they are not a bad studio. Like, the Chinese Room makes really fun video games, in my opinion. But the problem is that they had to develop Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which is not a video game that they would normally develop, in my opinion. Now, maybe they wanted to challenge themselves. Maybe they got the IP for cheap. I really don't know how it ended up falling into the hands of a developer that basically makes walking simulators, but it did. And that ended up leading to this game. Now, we don't know why the publisher Paradox chose the Chinese Room. I have no idea. And to choose them to redo the game from scratch is also an interesting decision. The Chinese Room prides itself on its environmental design and attention to detail, but at the end of the day, you need a lot more than just that to make a really good RPG. So with all that being said, and now the history of how this game ended up coming to be, now let's talk about what this game actually is. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen some of the clips going around on Twitter about this particular video game, but I'm going to showcase you the depth of the writing for this particular game, and I'm just going to use one particular scene that I remember on social media. I'm going to play it on screen right now. I hope you have your cringe pants on, because you're absolutely going to need it for this.
Unsatisfied, the gardener is gone. Your moonflowers are gone, and soon you too will be gone.
I will never leave you. For you, dear fire, are mine. Mine! My love!
Yeah, to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what the hell we just looked at either. This is a prime example of one of the biggest issues that I think is plaguing the gaming industry right now, and that is the lack of talented writers. I genuinely believe that a lot of the modern day problems that we are facing in the gaming industry could be solved by actually having talented writers again. And that goes well beyond the gaming industry too. I think that even spills over into movies, TV shows, and whatnot. I think the talent and the creativity and the thought processes behind a lot of the writers that we have today are just unfortunately not there. It's not up to par. It's not anywhere close to what it used to be. And this is why the stories that we're getting, the characters that we're getting, they're not fleshed out. They're completely cringe. I mean, I don't even know what the hell the animation was in this. I really don't even know what I'm looking at this point. It's the weirdest scene. But again, this is only a small tidbit of the overall problems that are affecting this particular video game. So the reason why I'm talking about this sequel is because now we see the results of what happens when unfortunately you do not give the people who bought the original games exactly what they're looking for with the sequel, and you completely abandon them, right? People bought this game hoping for them, hoping for them to be wrong. People bought this game hoping that all the bad things they were hearing about it were not true, but unfortunately it was, and it resulted in Paradox officially announcing that they are going to be taking a $37 million write-down after Vampire the Masquerade apparently missed the targets. The CEO praised the developers, though, the Chinese Room, and said that the responsibility lies fully with them as the publisher. Now, I'm okay with them trying to take the blame. That's respectful in a way, perfectly fine. But my thing is, you still kind of have to blame the developers, right? And again, I defended the Chinese Room and said that I think they make really good games. I do, but I just think this is not the kind of game for them. I don't think that they have experience making a game like this. So to throw something that is meant to be an action role-playing game into their hands where they never really quite did that, I don't think that really works out very well. And perhaps that's what Paradox means by by taking the blame because they're the ones that chose the Chinese room. Nobody knows why they chose a Chinese room, but they are the ones that did so. And by doing so, you can clearly see that that was not the right decision. So they lost almost $40 million for this entire situation. And I want to cover this article talking about it from gamesindustry.biz. So it says the following: Paradox has announced that it is writing down SEK 355, which is around $37 million of development costs for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 after early sales figures fell short of expectations following mixed reviews. The company said it would still deliver the 2 planned expansions to the game. Now, data from Game Discovery Co. suggests that the game sold around 121,000 copies on Steam, which would amount to a net revenue of around $4 million. The game currently has mixed reviews on the platform and on Metacritic. CEO Frederick Wester took it on the chin and said Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is a strong vampire fantasy and we are pleased with the developers' work on the game, he said in a statement. We've had high expectations for a long time since we saw that it was a good game with a strong IP in a genre with a broad appeal. A month after release, we can sadly see that the sales did not match our projections, which necessitates the write-down. The responsibility lies fully with us as the publisher. The game is outside of our core areas. In hindsight, it is clear that this has made it difficult for us to gauge sales. Going forward, we focus our capital to our core segments and at the same time, we'll evaluate how we best develop World of Darkness' strong brand catalog in the future. So even they admit, even the CEO admits that they really don't have the experience to handle a game like this, but they still chose to do it anyway. For whatever that reason may be, I think personally they must have gotten it for cheap. I think they managed to buy this particular franchise for really cheap, and it has allowed them to be able to do this, right? And I just, or maybe the Chinese room was cheap. Maybe they were going to develop the game for cheap. I really don't know, honestly, at the end of the day, but all I can say is clearly there was a wrong decision made here, and even they have to acknowledge it. But they are taking the full blame for this as a publisher, so, you know, we can rock with that. Now, they initially greenlit the game after acquiring the IP in 2015, with Hardsuit Labs making something closer to the cult favorite 2004 original. That title was due to ship in 2020, but Paradox terminated his deal with Hardsuit after 2 delays and the removal of Kai Clooney and Brian Mitsoda, the senior creatives on the project. UK-based studio The Chinese Room then took over the project, ultimately delivering a tighter narrative experience compared to the sprawling RPG original, which received a lukewarm response from players and critics. Now, I didn't even realize that Hardsuit Labs was giving us something that was more closer to the original 2004 video game, and I feel like at that point, that is what people would have wanted. The fact that they decided to go completely in the opposite direction and have the Chinese Room rebuild the game from scratch and make it into something similar to what they usually work on, which is a tighter narrative experience, I think that's where they went wrong. I think they went with the wrong developers, they went with the wrong kind of idea, and they went completely opposite to what people actually wanted with that particular video game. So again, the studio had expected the blowback from fans based on the game's deviation from the original's formula, with creative director Dan Pitchbeck telling the Goth Boss podcast of their attempts to ditch the name entirely. They were even thinking about getting rid of the name. That is how much they knew that this game wasn't anywhere close to what the original 2004 video game is. And you know what? Maybe that wouldn't have been a bad idea. Maybe you should have done a completely different video game, because here's the truth about this, right? Most people don't want to realize this, but when it comes to a sequel, there is a certain expectation that is held within that video game from the jump. You can do different things. Nobody's saying you have to do the exact same thing over and over again. You can do different things, but people are going to have certain expectations. For example, we talked about Ghosts of Yotei going completely different from Jin Sakai, turning into an anthology series instead of doing a direct sequel, which everybody assumed that's what it was going to be. That was a massive difference, and clearly you could see it in the sales. Is it selling bad? No. But is it selling less than Tsushima? Absolutely. Because the people who thought that they were going to get the sequel to Jin Sakai's story, they didn't get that. So ultimately, you lost those people right from the jump. They weren't even going to bother going into the second game, because there's not even that emotional attachment, right? Nobody cares. If you're emotionally attached to the first game and you want to see what happens in the second game, well, now you're not going to get the second game because it's a different story. So nobody cares. So if they would have named this game something different, I think they might have been able to avoid that initial, like, okay, what is going on here kind of reaction, because there's no expectation. It's a brand new game, brand new name, zero expectations whatsoever. They even said that the tricky question around it was Bloodlines 1. Pitchback said, are you making a sequel to Bloodlines 1? We used to sit there and have these planning sessions of how do we get them to not call it Bloodlines 2. That feels like the most important thing we do here. To come at this and say this isn't Bloodlines 2. We can't make Bloodlines 2. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. In Paradox's most recent trading update, the company reported a 20% increase in operating profit for the first 9 months of the year, and said that Q4 will likely be the most intense period in Paradox history, driven by 3 game launches and updates to many of its core titles. Well, that's because they're about to lose a ton of money, which again we spoke about. They're writing down almost $40 million. That is a lot of money, especially for a video game like this. They probably didn't have that super high of a budget. I mean, it had a high budget obviously, but $40 million, that's a lot of money to lose on a game like this. Now, very clearly people are not happy. If you go over to the Steam forums, it's a bloodbath, right? You got all kinds of threads to look at where people, you know, quite simply say that this is an absolute trash heap. You know, if you look here, this person is hoping that this could be the next Cyberpunk. Then maybe people will realize it becomes a cult favorite again, where, you know, maybe from the roadmap, it's going to make a comeback. Master the Masters, that's what they say over on Steam. I don't think that's going to happen personally. You have this thread that has been locked down, by the way, by moderators that simply says, woke killed this game. Nuff said. Again, I don't even think it was woke this, guys. I think that obviously that is part of it. You could tell by the writing, it is cringe, it is terrible, but I don't really think that's it. I think what it is that this is a game that has a certain player in mind, a certain mindset in mind, at least from the first one anyway, and they completely went against that. They didn't even bother releasing a game that is even close to the first game. And so when people bought the game expecting a sequel to the first, they ended up getting a completely different game that should have had a different name. I think that's really what it is. I think having the Chinese room develop this game was the worst idea that they could have possibly had, and that's what killed this game. If you go to this thread, it says, do not buy this game. Originally, the game was being developed by Hard Suit Labs with expectations of a deep stat-heavy RPG similar to the original. They have every intention of making a true successor worthy of its name, but the development eventually was taken over by the Chinese Room in 23, a studio known for narrative-driven atmospheric experiences rather than open-ended RPG mechanics, which the first game was successful for. They rebuilt the entire codebase and gameplay mechanics, leaving only the levels and the art style intact. So again, that's what I believe is truly what's causing the problem here. Even got this thread here from Sailor. What have you done to the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2? How could you possibly butcher the legacy of the first game and the entire Vampire Masquerade universe? This is an absolute train wreck of a game. It's hard to even know who to blame because almost everything is a complete failure. Who paid you to sabotage the game this brutally? People are not happy. You got this person, Batman, total trash. Save your money. Played it for 4 hours at my friend's house who was stupid enough to buy it, and then she deleted it from her Steam account. It is not an RPG and no way even remotely like Bloodlines 1. Do I need any more proof, ladies and gentlemen, to tell you that this is quite frankly, like, this is the worst decision they ever made by using the Chinese room to develop this game? Look at the Steam numbers, okay? Now, I understand people are going to scream out there, the Steam numbers don't matter. I hear you. I see your comments. I laugh at them and I move on. 377 players playing the game right now at the time of recording this video, with a 544 24-hour peak, a complete death from last month, 27,000 players concurrently last month. People had hope. People had hope. 27,000 is obviously pretty bad considering the budget, but still, at the end of the day, it could have went somewhere. It could have had good word of mouth. It definitely could have spread if it was something that people are actually happy with. But the truth is that looking at this bar graph, you can clearly see that people checked out very, very quickly. Within just a couple of days of release, it already lost over 10,000 players. And within a couple of days more than that, it lost another 10,000 players. And then about, you know, maybe about I would say 2 weeks after that, it was down to about 2,000 players, where then it completely died all the way till today. It's ugly, ladies and gentlemen, really ugly. So ultimately, this comes down to the fact that we see sequels like this all the time, where unfortunately it doesn't respect what the first video game ended up setting up. And it's sad, man, because a sequel is meant to be easy money. Really, if you have a successful first game and you follow it up with a second game, you have a built-in fan base that wasn't there the first time that you should be able to utilize very easily to make all the money in the world. But unfortunately, when word gets around that your sequel is anything but an actual sequel, it is actually a completely different game masquerading itself by using the same name in order to, you know, I guess profit off of the internal clout from the first game, it just doesn't look good, and it completely spreads around to the point where you can't put out the fire. And this is exactly what happened here. This game burned down to the ground, and there's nothing they could do to save it at this point. And you know, they can finish their roadmap, they could do their expansions, they could do whatever they want, but ultimately I think whoever bought it probably regrets it 90% of the time. So you guys let me know in the comments down below, if you played this game, what did you think about it? Was it really as bad as people say? Or if you didn't play the game, did you choose not to because you heard all the bad stuff? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, consider hitting that like, subscribe, all that good YouTube algorithm stuff, and I will see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.